So Hannes Jansen van Vuren is an international technical advisor on financial investigations. As I mentioned, he joins us now. Very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us. So SARS confirming there was no declaration of $580,000 which was illicitly brought into South Africa and reportedly given to Cyril Ramaphosa's employee at Phala-Phala farm. I'm just wondering, where does the responsibility lie to declare monies coming into South Africa? By the recipient and or the person who brings the money in, or by the person who brings the money into South Africa, the foreign currency?
Well, I think in this case, good evening to you and good evening to the listeners in South Africa. I think in this case, by the admission of the individual, the South Sudanese businessman acknowledged that he brought in the money, and according to him and his affidavit, he did declare bringing in that large amount of USD. The legislation in South Africa is quite clear, both for citizens and non-citizens of South Africa leaving the borders of South Africa or entering the borders of South Africa. There's a declaration system in place where everybody has got the onus to declare any funds above the threshold. And as far as I can remember, the threshold, I think, is 50,000 Rand. So you have an obligation to declare that you either bring in this money in excess or you're taking the money out of the country. And in this case, the South Sudanese businessman would have been obliged by law to declare that he brought in those funds.
And your port of entry, how much does that influence the stricture and regulation of those SARS rules? So if I'm not wrong, I read an article by this very gentleman interview on one of these national publications where he said it is not uncommon for businessmen from foreign countries to come into the country with large sums of money, and it either goes undetected or undeclared.
Yes, it's very possible, and we've seen a number of high-level cases of funds either leaving the borders of South Africa or coming into South Africa, which had deliberately not been declared but had been discovered. It is not that difficult to bring in foreign currency to come into South Africa or even taking it out. And it's very possible through corrupt activities to ensure that the authorities do look the other way. As far as I know, that the authorities, especially the authorities at customs, especially at our airports, I'm not so sure about our borders, our northern borders, do have the proper equipment and training to act on these kind of cases, and they know exactly what to look for. But yes, it is very possible to bring in large amounts of cash or take it out undetected. There's many ways that they can take it out.
So I know I'm belaboring the point, but I just want to make sure that we all understand. So is the SARS confirmation of the non-existence of a declaration by the businessman a confirmation that President Ramaphosa not only deliberately hid the money, but it speaks to the suspicions that President Ramaphosa never intended to declare the money at all?
No, not at all. Not unless the businessman from South Sudan actually presents an affidavit to the facts. It is purely just speculation without any evidence. So on the other hand, if the law enforcement agency who investigates this case can prove that President Ramaphosa had a direct influence, firstly, in covering up the theft of the funds, his property. Secondly, having an influence or direct influence in apprehending of the suspects. And lastly, a direct influence in the premature release of those suspects that stole his property. The authorities may be a step closer only to forming a suspicion, but still not clear on evidence around the intentional criminal tax evasion. Remember, as a billionaire and president of South Africa, he could also have been tremendously embarrassed about the fact that his property was stashed in such a way in couches, which is unheard of. And also, secondly, because it was so easily stolen.
The fact that President Ramaphosa has said that he reported the matter to his personal protective security, which who are members of the SAPS, the head of that protective police unit. Does that also speak to the fact that he acknowledged that there was money in his house that had not been formally recorded? Because you spoke about the embarrassment and where and how the money was held. And I'm just wondering, can the president be held personally liable for actively aiding and participating in tax evasion?
Well, keep in mind, this is his property. I mean, he can do whatever with his property, what he wants. If he wants to stash it into couches or put it in the deep freezer, that's up to him. He's a billionaire after all. So, and I don't think that that kind of money is unusual for him as a businessman to be around with. But just to get back to your question, so can the president be held personally liable to actively aiding and participating in tax evasion? No, not necessarily. It depends if the cattle farm is a registered entity, and the directors of the entity need to present reasons why they have not declared the income. But remember, with tax returns, there's a timeline involved here. I don't have to, I should, by law, present my annual tax returns on a yearly basis. If I don't do that, that will accrue penalties, rightfully so, because the legislation says that I must declare my income on a yearly basis. Only once I declare my taxable income, and in this case, this company, if it declares the taxable income, and the South African Revenue Authority discovers that there was an under-declaration or false declaration, then it goes over into the remit of a criminal case. In this instance, we don't know what the timeline is. I don't have knowledge of what the timeline is here. So if President Ramaphosa, he acknowledges it's his property, the way it was stashed and the way it was kept. If you look at the timeline, if there was a timeline for anything up to a year that he didn't declare this income, or the directors of the company didn't declare this income, I mean, they can accrue penalties because they have to declare this. But if there's evidence that he deliberately avoided declaring the income or under-declare or falsely declare that kind of money, then we start looking at criminal cases. So if I look at the public reports and the news reports, at this stage, I wouldn't be able to say there's a clear case for tax evasion here.
The EFF says the Phala-Phala farm scandal is not only one of the greatest violations of South African laws and undermining of our economy, but that it is actually one of the contributing factors to the grey listing of our country by the Financial Action Task Force. Is this stretching it, or do you think it is a real possibility?
Well, the irony of the EFF to make that kind of statement is amazing. And I do think the EFF need to go back to the blackboard and probably look at the Julius Malema Ratananga trust investigation as a case example to see what an alleged money laundering case looks like. And also in the process, invite Mr. Arthur Fraser to the class to actually see what money laundering or alleged money laundering looks like.
All right.
As far as the grey listing of South Africa by the FATF goes, this has been coming for quite some time. This is not something that has happened overnight. I think it's been several years that there were instances where we found evidence through reports that alleged terrorist organizations had been settling in South Africa, and we don't see that there were any action. So that just started to snowball, and I think eventually accumulated with a number of other things, other factors, that we were grey listed. I certainly don't agree with the FF that this case, which involved President Ramaphosa, has contributed in any way to the grey listing of South Africa. I think that's not even a stretch. I think that's just inaccurate. And as of now, no evidence of President Ramaphosa's direct deliberate involvement of money laundering, as far as I can tell, had been found, and anything beyond that is just pure speculation.